We've been on the run, everybody run, looking out for number one. California, here we come, right back where we started from. Hustlers, get your guns, everybody run, looking out for number one. California, here we come, look back where we started from. California, California, here we come. Hey guys, welcome back to Movies and TV Shows on the Ball, and this is going to be part 3 of One Tree and the OC. Yes, this is the first episode of the OC that I'm going to cover, and I recently did a podcast, well, a couple months ago, on 2 episodes of One Tree Hill, and I decided that I went in, found on DVD the OC on DVD, so I thought about doing one episode, the first episode of the OC, and talk about that. And the OC came out pretty much when I was in high school. It debuted in 2003, so I was a freshman when it came out, and it ended in 2007 when I was a senior. And so it lasted for about 4 years, 4 seasons. So it take place it kind of debuted about the same time I was a freshman to when I was a senior in high school. So the OC to me was one of those shows, came out. It was produced by WB, and it kind of was like Fox's next Beverly Hills 90210 show. And it came out at the same time as One Tree Hill. One Tree Hill probably came out, I think, a month One Tree Hill debuted September 23rd. So, and the OC debuted, so I'm trying to say, it debuted August 5th. So it came out probably about a month earlier than the One Tree Hill, but it was produced by Warner Brothers, and I think sort of sold from Warner Brothers to Fox, because I've looked at it on, when you get it on DVD, the WB, the dun 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 WB logo. The show pretty much centers around Ryan Atwood and about his sort of life, and kind of going from the mean streets of Cheno to the, the fancy streets of the OC. Because I did my homework, I'm going to kind of do a look at who was the creator of it. The creator of the show was Josh Schwartz. Josh Schwartz pretty much started, I think the OC was his first. He executive produced and created the OC. That was his first television show that he created. But he went on to, after that, to produce Chuck once the show ended up. He was in Chuck. He produced Chuck with Zachary Levi. He was the executive producer for Gossip Girls. He executive produced before the OC. He also directed Fun Size, Looking for Alaska as well. It was also, the other creators were, writers were Mark Fish. Mark Fish also wrote for Scandal. He was a co-producer for for Damages, supervisor producer for Revenge. And he also was a supervisor producer for the television series The Playboy Club, to name a few. Um, and the pilot episode was written by um, Josh Schwartz. And it starred, I'll get to the, hi, this is Troy McClure moment right now. It starred Peter Gallagher, who plays Sandy Cohen. Sandy Cohen or Peter Gallagher is best known as Buddy Kane in American Beauty, where he played the guy that was hanging out with Annette Bening's, Kevin Spacey's wife in the movie. Mr. Deeds, he was in Mr. Deeds. He played Chuck Cedar, who was sort of the rich, snooty businessman who was trying to get Mr. Deeds, and turns out to be the villain. He was Peter in While You Were Sleeping. His other roles include episodes of Law and Order SVU, A Bad Mom's Christmas, episodes of New Girl, The Good Wife, Step Up, Revolutions, and episodes of Shark. He did episodes of Family Guy, and let's see, he did voice work for Superman the Animated Series and Homicide, and he also did the television show Homicide: Life on the Streets, to name a few. He also was in the 1996 film Titanic, and to Gillian on her 37th birthday, which is one of his big movies. He plays Sandy Cohen, who is basically the guy who lets Ryan kind of adopts Ryan Atwood. Then you have Kirsten Cohen, played by Kelly Rowan. She played Peter's mother in Hook. She was in Candyman: Farewell to the Flesh. She was in episodes of CSI Miami and episodes of CSI, playing two different characters. Her other works include Three to Tango, Chicken Soup for the Soul, Late Last Night with Emilio Estevez, episodes of To Have and to Hold with Maura Kelly, who was in One Tree Hill as Karen Rowe. Her other works include Da Vinci's Inquest and episodes of Dallas and The New Adam 12, to name a few. She also showed up in Growing Pains in 1990. She plays Kristen Cohen, who is Sandy Cohen's wife. And Sandy Cohen is a defense attorney, and Kristen Cohen is sort of you find out later that she runs the Newport Society Socialite Club. Then you have Ben McKenzie, who played Ryan Atwood. Ben McKenzie is best known since showing up his early works include episodes of Jag, and he was in the film 88 Minutes. But I know him as Commissioner Gordon in the television series Gotham that ran from 2014 to 2019. He was also in Southland from 2009 to 2013, so about 2 years after the OC went off the air. He was also in 88 Minutes with Al Pacino, and he voiced Bruce Wayne in Batman Year One. So he has had some ties with the Batman, with DC and Batman. And one day I'll get into the first episode of Gotham sooner or later. Then you had Marissa Cooper, played by Misha Barton, Misha Barton is best known for her role in The Sixth Sense. She also played Helix, the 12-year-old actress in Notting Hill with Hugh Grant and um, Julia Roberts, as well as uh, she's actually British, so she's done a lot of British movies and television shows. She was in the SWAT sequel, SWAT Unit 887 in 2015. Let's see, she was in the assassination of a high school principal, or assassination of a high school president, excuse me, with Bruce Willis and Michael Rappaport. She was in she played girlfriend in James Blunt's Goodbye My Lover. Goodbye My Lover, goodbye my friend. She was in the Cancel Too Soon series Fastlane. She was in the television series Once and Again that she did. This was sort of semi prior to the OC. She did voice work for the Nickelodeon television series Kablam! And she was in All My Children, to name a few. Then you had Seth Cohen, played by Adam Brody. Seth Cohen is best known, or Adam Brody, excuse me. I think Adam Brody is very known for Seth Cohen. Well, she also played Helix, the 12-year-old actress in Notting Hill with Hugh Grant and Julia Roberts, as well. That was Misha Barton. Then you had Seth Cohen. I'm going back to Seth Cohen, who's played by Adam Brody. Adam Brody is best known for his roles in such films such as he was in Mr. and Mrs. Smith. He played Benjamin Dindez, the hacker. He did that right around the same time as the OC. He was in The Land of Women with Meg Ryan. His other roles include before the OC started, he was in episodes of Gilmore Girls, episodes of Smallville, and he played high school guy in American Pie 2. After the OC, he was in Mr. and Mrs. Smith. He played Benjamin Diaz, who was sort of the hacker who wanted to was sort of the target that Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie were tracking. He was in Thank You for Smoking. He played the assistant Jack, the Hollywood assistant Jack, which is a great film. He was in Jennifer's Body with Megan Fox. He was in Cop Out with Bruce Willis and Tracy Morgan, excuse me. He played Deputy Hoss in Scream 4, and he returned in a cameo, uncredited cameo in Scream 5. He was in, let's see, Think Like a Man 2, the television TV series Startup, but he's recently been in Shazam. He played superhero Freddy in both Shazam 1 and Shazam 2, Fury of the Gods. to name a few. His latest film was American Fiction, to name a few. But he plays Seth Cohen, who is uh, Sandy and Kristen's son, and he's kind of, I guess, the first. We'll get into it in the first episode, but he sort of stays in as a kind of nerd, not a nerd, but sort of an outsider, kind of like Ryan. Then you had um, Rachel Bilson, who plays Summer Roberts. Rachel Bilson is best known for her role in, for basically Summer Roberts in the OC, but her other works include, she was in Heart of Dixie, which was a television series show where she was a doctor. She was in the Canceled Too Soon series Take Two. She was in she had an uncredited role as herself in an episode of Gossip Girl. She played Millie in the underrated Doug Liman movie Jumper with Hayden Christensen. They actually met on set and dated for a couple months, both Hayden Christensen and Rachel Bilson. She was in New York, I Love You. She was in episodes of How I Met Your Mother. She was in an episode of Nashville. She did some work as in Drunk History, and she's recently been on the television series Accused. She also showed up for an episode of Chuck that was produced by one of the producers of the OC. So it's kind of got that, and her earliest work was in The Human Target in 1992. So she plays Summer Roberts, and Summer Roberts is sort of the Valley Girl kind of thing, and she's best friends with Marissa Cooper. Speaking of the Coopers, you've got Julie Cooper, played by Melinda Clark. Melinda Clark is best known for her role as pretty much as Julie Cooper, but she was Jessica Priest in the 1997 comic book film Spawn. She showed up in 6 episodes of CSI as Lady Heather and Dr. Kelser, 2011 to 2011. Her other works include, she was in episodes of Ghost Whisperer. She played herself in an episode of Entourage. She was in an episode of Star Trek Enterprise. She was in episodes of Xena Warrior Princess, Seinfeld. And she was in she did voice work for the Animatrix and was in the Canceled Too Soon television series Firefly as well. But she was in the OC for pretty much most of the season. She actually showed up again in Chuck, which was produced by that. So that's Marissa Cooper. And then you had Jimmy Cooper, played by Tate Donovan. Tate Donovan, I had to look him up just because he's kind of one of those character actors that he's been in a lot of movies. He was an Argo shooter, but if you were a 90s kid, you would know him as the voice of Hercules. He was the voice of Hercules in the 1997 Hercules film. His other works, he's kind of been kind of a character actor throughout most of it. He does voice Hercules for Disney video games like Kingdom Hearts and stuff. He was in episodes of Damages. Let's see. He was in Love Potion number 9. Space Camp. Let's see. Good Night and Good Luck. He was in Shooter, The Cleaner, No Ordinary Family, and Manchester by the Sea, Limitless, The Mysteries of Laura, and recently he has been in Ghosted, to name a few. He also did voice for Disney Speedstorm as the voice of Hercules, so they get him a lot for Hercules too. And he plays Jimmy Cooper, who's pretty much this guy who is sort of the financial manager of the OC community, and he gets into a lot of trouble at the beginning of the episode. So and then you had Chris, I guess I'll do Chris Carmack as Luke Ward. Chris Carmack is best known for his roles in the OC, where he played Luke Ward for about 28 episodes. So he's only there for about the first 2 seasons. He got into some big roles later in his career after the OC. In 2013 to 2018, he was Will Lexington in Nashville, the country music television, ABC television show. He was in episodes of Grey's Anatomy as Dr. Atticus Lincoln. He did voice work for Alpha and the Omega about the Wolves as the voice of Garth. He was in Beauty and the Briefcase. He was in Into the Blue 2, where he played Sebastian, or Into the Blue 2, The Reef. This is he played Sebastian. He was in episodes of Desperate Housewives, CSI Miami. I know him from this show, but he was also in Just My Luck. He played David Pennington, who was the boyfriend of Lindsay Lohan's character at the beginning of the film, who basically is, is the one that he's, she's kind of smitten to at the beginning of the film, and then loses her luck with him. So that's, I guess that's Chris Carmack. And Chris Carmack is, he plays Luke, and Luke is the boyfriend of Marissa at the beginning of the show, and he's kind of got a Valley Boy kind of feel to him, and I'll get into it a little bit later as the show goes on. But I think that's the cast for at least the pilot episode, just because there's more cast members coming throughout the show, but I'll get into it. And then last but not least, there's Dawn Atwood, played by Dawn Atwood is played by Daphne Ashbrook. Daphne Ashbrook is best known for her work, and she was in the TV movie Doctor Who the Movie. She was Annie Patterley for 5 episodes in the series Jag. She was in episodes of Star Trek Deep Space Nine, and her other works include Without a Trace, NCIS, Law and Order LA, which was a canceled too soon show. She was also in episodes of Crossing Jordan, Judging Amy, Diagnosis Murder, and the TV movie 14 Going on 30, to name a few. But she plays Dawn Atwood, who is basically his mom, who has a has a smoking problem and a drinking problem, and she sort of abandons Ryan, and she tells Ryan to get out of the house. So that's the cast for the pilot. Here we go. So the show opens on the streets of Chino, and it's sort of it kind of we kind of right in the middle get into the action. Uh, we see sort of this guy who is Trey Atwood, played by Bradley Stryker, who was in Arrow, Smallville, and Angel, Bruce Almighty, and Ryan Ben McKenzie. Uh, uh, and Trey is holding a crowbar and standing next to a parked car, and he says, "If I don't teach you, if I don't teach you anything, brother, I will." And smashes the cop smashes the window of the driver's seat of the car, and as they're getting in, a patrolman car stops them and starts to chase them, and they get in the car, and then they drive off and there's a high-speed chase, and the high-speed chase, it doesn't take long because they smash the car into a pole, and then the cops arrest both Trey and Ryan, and then we're cut to, I guess, the next day. Ryan is meeting with his attorney, and we see him walking into into the cafeteria where he's going to meet his lawyer, played by known as Sandy Cohen. And Sandy Cohen is kind of looking over his kind of rap sheet in his file, and he says, "Hi Ryan, I'm Sandy Cohen. Your court appointed. The courts appointed me as your attorney." And Ryan's first reaction is, "Where's my brother?" And Sandy says, "Well, Trey was over 18. Trey had a gun in his pants. He also had some weed on him. So, it's not looking good for Trey. Since Trey is over 18, Trey had a gun in his pants, and Trey stole the car. It is not looking good for Trey. And because Trey had a gun in his pocket, weed, drugs on him, and some pot in his jacket, and a couple of priors, he's looking at 3 to 5 years. Sandy and then Sandy kind of going looking at his client's case file, and as he's going through his case file, he sees that finds that Ryan's grades are not great, but he's amazed that he was in the 98th percentile when he took his SATs for the first time. And Sandy asks him about his future and where he's going to go. Is Ryan even thinking about going to college? And Ryan says, Ryan's kind of gives him sort of the lip and says, says sarcastically that modern medicine is going to advance where people can live up to the age of 100. But he also read an article that Social Security will run out in the year 2025, which is 2 years away from now, if you can believe it. And he says that that people have to work in their jobs until they're 80, and he says in such a sarcastic tone, that you people work in their 80, and he's kind of and the way Ryan says that to Sandy can show you that that Ryan doesn't really kind of think he has a future going anywhere, And I think once as the show progressed, that he will kind of find himself with some, you can look at, I can kind of see that in this first episode that Sandy is really trying to be Ryan's first real parental guardian. But we'll get into that a little later. So there, he's kind of saying, you know, so he basically says, so Sandy gets basically, Sandy kind of tells him it's that, you're kind of foolish to steal a car because your big brother told him to. Is foolish. Ryan gives him some lip about it and says, like, yeah, well, what else am I supposed to do? And he says, and he, and Sandy tells him to get over the fact that life has dealt you a bad hand. And Sandy lets him know that he understands, and Sandy kind of says, look, I understand it. That Sandy kind of understands that Ryan and Sandy kind of come from the same backstory, and Sandy gives him kind of the backstory of Sandy, where he says, I was pissed off all the time. Dad wasn't there. Mom worked 3 jobs, and I was mad and angry. And Sandy had a rough childhood. So Sandy gets Ryan out of jail, and as Ryan is getting kind of waiting for his mom to pick him up, Sandy says, just remember, you have a court appeal in a couple months. You just need to be there the 19th or something. He says, yeah, I'll show up, whatever. And then a car pulls up, and the car pulls up is in this kind of rinky-dink car, and a woman comes out, and this is Dawn Atwood, and Dawn Atwood is like, what kind of family do I have? What kind of, how is it that I'm blessed with this terrible family? She should have let him. And then she's like, Sandy kind of introduces himself to Dawn Atwood and says, I'm Ryan's attorney. And Dawn is like, you should have let him rot in there, just like his brother, just like his dad did, just like his brother's gonna do. And was that's, let's see, and hits, and I like the fact that when she drives up, she ends up hitting the curb and then coming out and saying all that stuff. And then and you can kind of look at Ryan, and Ryan kind of looks completely embarrassed, and he sort of hides away in his hides away, kind of crouches down, and or hides away next to the column, as his mom basically belittles him. And Sandy tries to clear out the air and introduce himself to Dawn Atwood. And so then Dawn beckons Ryan to get in the car, and he ends up going with his mom back to their house. Before he gets into the car, Sandy gives him sort of his card with his home number and says, if you need anything, just call me. So then they get back to the Atwoods' residence, and we see Dawn kind of pouring a drink, and she's like, look, I've had enough of this. This is what Dawn's kind of saying, you need to get out of the house. And he says, yeah. And then a man sitting in the chair says, yeah, you should listen to your mom and get out of the house. And Ryan basically says to her mom's boyfriend, named AJ, played by Ron DeLabaro from CSI and Good Advice, tells Ryan, kind of basically says, "Yeah, listen to your mother and get out." And he's in the lazy chair flipping through channels. And Ryan says, "Well, this isn't your house, man." And AJ gets up and says, "Well, you're a tough guy, aren't you?" And they start, kind of, he starts pushing him, kind of pushing on him, and AJ ends up kind of hitting Ryan, and Ryan, just says, "Okay, I'm out," and goes up to his room and packs his bags and heads out on his bike to um, go to a payphone to call up friends to see if they can give him a ride, give him a place to stay. Uh, they all and then they all tell him no, and this sort of pisses off Ryan. And you can see him smash the phone receiver on the payphone, and so he kind of, in a last ditch effort, grabs the card that Sandy gave him, and ends up calling Sandy, and Sandy pulls up and says, "You could do worse." And they drive up to the OC, and we've got this really cool scene where it goes from kind of cheno to the OC, and go to kind of the Orange County, and sort of like we see sort of the beach, people walking, a guy's throwing frisbees to his dog. Let's see. Girls in bikinis, and Ryan's kind of like trying to make small talk in the car and says, "Boy, this is a nice car. I didn't know lawyers like you made this kind of money." And Sandy says, "We don't, but my wife does." And then they go into a gated community, which we only see, I think, in the pilot, that it's a gated community. And they drive up to their casa, and as they're driving up, Sandy parks his car and says, "Let me do the talking, and I'll let you come in a little later." And there's this kind of nice moment, right, where there's kind of this nice moment where, and we also see golf carts, but there's this kind of nice moment where Sandy says, "Let me do the talking, and I'll come back, I'll come and get you later." And he takes the keys out of the car, and Ryan says, "It's no fun if the keys are in the car." And Sandy kind of says, "Yeah, you're right," and puts the keys back in the car for them to listen. So he could listen to the radio, so Sandy could tell Christian that that he brought one of his clients home. And Sandy says, and so she goes up to Christian and says, and she's kind of like shocked, like, "You brought him home?" And he said, "It's just for it's just for a couple nights." And did you and Kristen's like, "Did you ever think about our family and our house? Did you ever think about Seth?" And then she kind of says, "Look, Sandy, this isn't a stray puppy you can just pick up off the street and bring home. This is a teenage boy, basically." And then she says, "It wouldn't be a time that you brought your work home with you, bringing home felons and things." And Sandy says, "He's just a kid who has no place to go." And then so Kristen calls Ryan a felon. Sandy kind of defends him and saying he's not a felon. He's just a guy who has nowhere to go. Uh, and she's like, "What did you ever think about Seth? Do you think about him that Ryan might endanger Seth's life?" And but she ends up kind of saying, "You know what?" But Sandy says to Christian that, Seth may be needing kind of a friend like Ryan, somebody like Ryan to hang out with would be a good involvement for him. And so, but she kind of says, she ends up walking away, and Sandy says, "Where are you going?" And is like, "I'm going to go," sarcastically say, "I'm going to go put my jewels in the vault." And she's like, "Where do you think I'm going?" "I'm going to, the boy needs some hot towels and some new clothes, and I just need to go get it to him." And so then, and she then says, she'll sleep in the pool. He'll stay in the pool house. And then Sandy asks her, and he's also going to need some toothbrush as well. So Ryan now decides so Ryan's now out of the car, and he's kind of walks down to the to the bottom of the driveway, and he's got a pack of cigarettes. He opens the pack and puts the cigarette in his mouth and starts, and he lights it and starts smoking. And there's this girl standing next to him, waiting for her ride. And she turns over to him and says, "Who are you?" And Ryan, all cocky and trying to be a badass and everything, says, "Whoever you want, whoever you want me to be." And she's like, "Okay," like, that line's kind of doesn't work on her. And as he's lighting the cigarette, she asks him if she could bum a cigarette off him, and he says sure. And they have this kind of nice, it's kind of a nice meet cute moment where they kind of, it's sort of showing the, you know, this moment where they're kind of sharing a cigarette, and it's kind of this kind of cute romantic, in a way, look to it. And then so they kind of start smoking, and he tells her basically the events that have just happened, where he's like, "I stole a car." Or she says, "How did you really get here?" And he says, "Well, really, seriously?" And the backstory for Marissa, where about his mom, who's, how he stole the car with his brother, and his brother's in jail. That he got out of jail, his mom threw him out and wound it up with the Coens, basically the first 10 minutes of the show. And Marissa says that Ryan, she kind of says, "You're that cousin from Boston, aren't you?" And at that time, Sandy and right when, she says that, he's like, "Yeah." And what's interesting is that when Sandy comes down the driveway to talk to Ryan, Marissa pretty much sees him and stomps out her cigarette, and she says, "Oh, Mr. Cohen, what are you doing here?" And Ryan's still smoking. And one thing I listened to, because I listened to this on the commentary, he says that Ryan, you kind of felt like Ryan is so used to being around adults who smoke that he is like, kind of, him smoking around an adult isn't that big of a deal to him. But I do kind of like the PSA kind of thing that she actually stomped out the cigarette. Um, and he's like, and she's like, "Mr. Cohen, or how are you?" And, "I'm just talking to your nephew." "Oh, yes, my favorite nephew." And and he says, "My favorite nephew from Boston and from Seattle," and he's like, and Ryan sort of clears the air and says, "Mom lives in Boston, Dad lives in Seattle." And Marissa's confused, says, "Dad lives in Seattle, Mom lives in Boston." Excuse me. Sandy tells Marissa that they're, and then there's this kind of moment where she says, "We're excited about your fashion show for charity and fundraiser for tomorrow night." And he's like, she's like, "Yeah, it should be great." And and then she kind of invites some, or Marissa invites Ryan to the charity event. By the time she uh, asks him to go to the event, a truck pulls up, and this is our first introduction to Luke. And Luke, he's kind of got the blue, he wears a lot of Hollister. He looks like a Hollister model, and he wears the puka shells around his neck, and he's got the truck, and Luke, uh, and we're kind of slowly introduced to Luke, and he's like, "Who's that guy?" While Marissa's getting in the car, and when she gets in the car, she and Luke kiss, and then and then she's like, "Who's the new kid?" And then Ryan, and then the Luke and Marissa leave, and there's kind of that moment. There's that kind of look in that face where on Ryan that he thinks he's kind of found the girl of his dreams, but kind of when she sees him with Luke, there's that, you know, clumps your heart that she's with another guy kind of moment. So anyway, so Luke takes Marissa out, and they're driving away. Ryan and Sandy end up heading back to the house, and Sandy says, "You look, there's no smoking in this house." And Ryan decides to throw out a cigarette, and there's this great scene where they're walking up the house. Ryan throws out a cigarette, and Sandy goes down to the driveway and stomps it out. Then, then they go into the pool house where Kirsten and the maid are there that just set up the pool house for Ryan to be his living coordinates, his man cave, if you will. Uh, and she's like, "Welcome to our home." And so this is a kind of a good moment where Kristen and Ryan get to kind of have a full meet, and he says, "Thank you for everything, and if you need anything, don't hesitate to ask." So then the next morning, Ryan wakes up, and he kind of looks around his new living space. He walks out of the pool house and looks around, and it's just beautiful, Orange County, view. And he starts kind of wandering the house, and he sees our first introduction to Seth. And Seth is sitting there with a bowl of cereal in his pajamas, and they're playing and he's playing PlayStation 2 video games, and as they're playing video games, he's like, "Do you want to play?" And so they kind of bond, and you can kind of see this kind of like this moment where they're bonding over video games, and they're playing it, and as they're playing I guess a fighting game, and Ryan's got kind of got the spoon in his mouth, and he's kind of playing, and Seth is like, oh, you didn't see that coming, you didn't see that coming, starts to taunt him in a way, and and then they start saying, well, that was fun, and he said, and then Sandy or they play video games, get to know more about each other. Seth mentions to Ryan about what if you want to play. Do you want to play Grand Theft Auto? I think it's fun. You get to run around, steal cars and stuff. And he kind of says, well, like stealing cars isn't fun. There he kind of mentions the fact that Ryan has kind of mentions the fact that Ryan steals car. Kind of stole the car, and he's kind of like kind of. Then they kind of change the subject because Sandy shows up after buying kind of with the groceries and says to Seth, like, hey, it's a beautiful day out there. You guys shouldn't be inside playing video games. And he's like, and Ryan and Sandy's telling Seth that why don't you find go do something with Ryan. And so Ryan's like, well, what do you guys do around here? And Sandy ends up taking Ryan to, or not Sandy, Seth ends up taking Ryan on a trip sailing on the bay. And so, and there's this kind of moment where they're kind of sailing and they're sitting, and then we see them kind of sailing, and they're sitting on the boat, and this is where they kind of bond. They bond about video game, or not bond about video, but they bond and they talk about the boat and how he wants to how he wants to take the sailboat to Tahiti and fish off the back of the boat. And Ryan asked him if he would get lonely doing it by yourself, and Seth says Summer will be there, and Ryan says, okay, so you're just gonna be with just your boat named Summer, and Seth says, no, it's a girl that I like that doesn't even know I exist. And Ryan's like, you named a boat after a girl who doesn't know you exist. And he even says, it's worse. She hasn't even spoke to me before. And then he says, spoke to me before. He never has spoken to her before. Sandy. So then they pull back into the shore and kind of try to put up the sailboat when Sandy shows up and talks to the boys and says, that they'll head over to, that he's like, hey, you know what, we're going to head over to the fashion show at about 7 p.m. where Seth says, good luck with that, and kinds of acts like he doesn't. And I like the fact that he's like doesn't want to go, and he says, oh, come on, Seth, they do it every year. It's like, yeah, but it's the same kids, same school. It's just every day is a fashion show for these kids. And he says, come on, it's for charity. But besides, Marissa invited Ryan. And Seth is like, wait, Marissa invited you? And he starts saying that I lived next door to Marissa for about most of my life. His dad almost married my mom, and she's never spoke to me. And when he says his dad almost married my mom, Sandy says, she didn't almost marry your mom. He's like, yeah, well. So there's this, you kind of can tell that you can kind of tell that but we can kind of tell that uh, Seth has never really been in the same circle as Marissa, even though they've been neighbors for a long time. That there is some, some relationships with both Sandy and with the Cohens and the Coopers. So then we see from the balcony of Marissa Cooper's house that both Ryan and Seth and Sandy are headed back to the house. While they're headed back to the house, she looks and she looks willingly at them. She hears a knock on the door and a doorbell ring, and walks down, and two SEC guys from the guys in suits have come in, and they give him their card, and her first reaction says to them is, "My dad's not here," and they say, "Well, can you tell us when we would be expecting him?" And the SEC guards are played by Barry Wiggins, who plays in Air Boss and Jag. He played Jim Harder. Let's see, he was in Loop, Jag. He played Agent Steve Perlman in this show. He was also in Spin City, episodes of Friends, The Practice, and Jareem headed officer in Star Trek Deep Space Nine, and episodes of Lois and Clark: The New Adventures. Anyway, they're standing there, and they say, she says, "My dad's not here," and he says, "Well, will you call us when will you call us when you see him and tell him it's very important for us to talk to him, and they're members of the SEC Trade Commission, so there's something to do with him and handling the money." So she shuts the door on them and talks and goes to see her dad, who's in his study, and see Jimmy Cooper working on his computer, and he's like, and Marissa's like, "Who are those men that came to the door?" And he says, "Oh, there's just some suits, some bureaucrats, the man." And you can see that Jimmy is really kind of, I think, what they did with the Jimmy character is that they made him really kind of like, you kind of don't like, you're not supposed to like him because he does seem like a sleazeball, but because it's played by the voice of Hercules, you're kind of still in his corner. So anyway, he kind of says, suits, bureaucrats, the man, the man, and so we can kind of see that Marissa's family's having some crisis as well. Meanwhile, Ryan is trying on, is kind of standing in the mirror, working on tying a tie, and he starts tying it. It doesn't work out, so he decides to go. He says, "You know what? I'm going to go without it." Sandy shows up and says, "Aren't you ready for the party? You ready to go?" And he's like, what about your tie?" And he says, "I'm not going to wear it." And Sandy says, "Look, I was 25 when I learned to tie my tie. Let's tie my first tie. I'm going to help you out." And so as Ryan is getting his tie tied, you can really see this moment between Sandy and Ryan, and and Ryan really kind of having the first real father figure to really help him in his life, help him with something. And so he ties the tie. Sandy ties the tie for him, and then uh, and Ryan kind of looks in the mirror, and as he's looking in the mirror, you can kind of see this sort of wow, I've made it look on his face. And this sort of moment too, where as Sandy is tying Ryan's tie, that he's finally found someone who really sort of is a father figure to him. So he kind of looks in the mirror and says, "I made it." And then we get back to um, and also like how Ryan or Seth, not Ryan, is Sandy is saying, you kind of asking Ryan what your thoughts on Seth are. He seems to be a cool kid. He's and Ryan's kind of like, yeah, he's cool. And Seth and how cool Seth is, and Sandy finishes straightening up his. Okay, yeah. And then we get back to the Coopers, and we see Marissa Cooper and uh, we see Marissa Cooper, or not Marissa Cooper, Julie Cooper, and Caitlin Cooper, who is played by this young Shailene Woodley, who was in films such as The Faults in Our Stars, and also in that's and the Divergent series. She is, and they're looking in the mirror, getting ready for the party. Uh, and what's interesting is Julie's looking at her hair and says, "What do you think of my hair, Caitlin? Is it too much like Avril Lavigne?" Um, and she's like, "No, it's perfect." And then Marissa comes down the stairs and says, "No, Mom, it's perfect." And then you can kind of see that Marissa is glowing in this beautiful dress. And the first thing um, uh, that Julie says to Marissa is that, "I thought you were gonna wear this dress," and she's like, "Why don't you go up and change?" So you can tell that Julie Cooper has very high standards for what her daughter should look like, and go and change. Then Jimmy gets the Cooper family to the fundraiser. But the moment is when you can tell that Julie Cooper has this very high standard for her family, that that she kind of looks at Marissa and says, "Marissa, you need to look more like this than anything." And then the Cohens arrive at the party, and or at the fundraiser, and he says that they're as they walk in, and they're walking to the outside patio, and the first thing that Ryan notices is this waiter with a bunch of appetizers, and he's like, escargot, uh, shrimp stuffed, shrimp stuffed mushrooms, and kind of hors d'oeuvres that you would probably, like escargot or whatever. That was you would have. And as as the waiter kind of goes, "Well, okay, I'll just walk away." Then Seth kind of kind of whispers in his ear, "Welcome to the dark side." We see Ryan kind of getting in, and this is the kind of the moment, and then Ryan's kind of at the party, and we see him socializing with all the socialites, and some of them are like, "So you must be the cousin from Boston," and he says, "Doesn't it get cold up there?" And he says, "Yes," and we can kind of see that there's a couple girls that try to think of him as pretty cute and hit on him a little bit, but and in that so obsessed is welcome to, and this is kind of where we see Ryan kind of getting inoculated into the world of the OC of Orange County by mingling with the socialites. Like, says that wasn't he, and then there's another one that says, "Weren't you the cousin from Boston?" And she says that there's no way I could live in a place that cold, and more of the Newport natives ask him about where he is, and this kind of gives us the sort of kind of like where he's going to, and then sees. So then Ryan ends up going up to the bar and ordering a 7 and 7, and he ends up getting it, and Ryan is sort of surprised that he actually got it, and he takes a sip of it, and he sees Kristen looking disappointed at Ryan, and he kind of can see, and she goes over to Ryan at the bar and sort of puts her hand out, and Ryan just hands her the 7 and 7 drink, and she says, "I want my husband to be right about you," and he says, and there's this kind of moment where he's like, kind of he wants something, or he kind of feels like, that she feels like, "I don't want to be disappointed in you. I want my husband to know that there's something good about you." And then, so then Ryan is, and then we see kind of where Seth sees Luke, and Luke is eating hors d'oeuvres, and Seth is like, "How's it going?" Really kind of meek and quiet, says, "How's it going, Luke?" And Luke is, "Well, oh, hey, it's you." And it's like, then kind of disses him, basically. I'm not going to really get into what he exactly says, but he basically, disses him and says, whatever, whatever, loser. And he says, "Oh, as Luke walks off, Seth says, 'Oh yeah, well, my summer was good too. Hope yours was good as well.'" And then Ryan and Sandy and Seth are all standing around, and Sandy sees Summer and says, "Is that Summer?" And Sandy says, tries to really, really starts to kind of embarrasses Seth, talking, trying to get Summer's attention, and Seth walks off, and Ryan says, "Way to salt his game, Mr. Cohen." Seth and Ryan find their seats at the kids' table, and what's interesting about the kids' table is there are all these kids sitting there, and Seth knows them because one of them was one of the kids that he does sailing. He takes sailing lessons with it, and it's kind of that like moment where he's like, Seth's trying to make conversation. Says, you're doing some pretty good strides with your sailing lessons. Okay, good talk. And then the fashion show starts. Marissa Cooper walks out and says, thank you guys for joining us for this fashion show. This is to honor the battered women's shelter or some stuff. So, we can kind of tell that it is going for a good. So she can introduce introduced the lights go down and Marissa comes on stage to introduce the fundraiser for the evening for the Battered Women's Shelter's fashion show for the store Fashion Island, which I don't know if it's a real store or not. And then to present and she's like, and it's for a great cause, you guys. So, enjoy. And as the music goes, Summer Roberts is the first one to do the fashion show or walk the runway. And Seth starts looking at her, and he's completely starstruck, and he says, "That girl's a 10," kind of thing. And you can see, what I love about it is that Summer is just looking like she's having the time of her life, walking this runway thing. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, we see the coordinator, the woman running around where the fashion show coordinator is Peggy, played by Ruth Williams. She was in The Family Man, Legally Blonde 2. She's running the show, and she's like going, "All right, that person in the back, you need to be here. That person back." And then this woman shows up with her daughter and says, my daughter is supposed to be in Vera Wang, not Calvin Klein. And Peg tells the daughter she would if she could fit into it. And she says, "It's puberty, honey. You'll grow into it." And we can kind of see how Newport, or the idea of the Newport socialites work. Then we see Marissa in the bathroom putting on makeup and kind of dotting her eyes, or dabbing her eyelids, and as she's doing it, we kind of get to see this moment where she sort of gets to be by herself and we get to sort of see what the real Marissa Cooper is going through. And then all of a sudden we hear a knock on the door, and it is Summer, who said, "Look what I stole from the." Summer shows up with 2 glasses of champagne and says, "Look what I stole." And Marissa brings out a glass of vodka and drinks the and she's like, "Look what I stole." And she brings out a bottle of vodka, and and she brings out a bottle of champagne. I think so they start showing what they're so we can see that they're basically getting away with stealing alcohol. So then while they're in the bathroom, one of the fashion coordinators opens the bathroom door and says, "All right, guy, Marissa, you're up." And so Marissa goes up to the catwalk and shows up and goes up the catwalk in a purple dress, and she kind of she walks the runway, And as she's walking the runway, she kind of does her poses and notices Ryan. And Ryan looks at her and kind of in that sort of, ooh, she seems kind of attractive. And Ryan, and then you see that Luke kind of sees, because like kind of cheering on his girlfriend and sees kind of that meet cute moment where Marissa looks at Luke, or Marissa looks at Ryan, and this sort of puts jealousy in Luke. So then, and that kind of makes Luke jealous, and then we get to Jimmy Cooper, and we're at the table of Jimmy Cooper and Julie Cooper, as they're kind of discussing how good the dress looks and how much Marissa's dress cost, and they're sitting with Sandy and Kirsten, and they talk about how much the dress cost, and he says, spin on Marissa's dress. The other couple at the table say that, and how much, and he's like, I bet it cost you a fortune. He's like, it should, because we give Jimmy our money and we trust him that he'll make good investments with it. And one of the guys says, I hope to die a rich man one day. This makes, and you can look at Jimmy's face, and he said Jimmy looks uncomfortable, and he starts looking at his glass, and he ends up saying, well, I gotta go, I need to run to the restroom. So Jimmy runs to the restroom, and as Jimmy's running to the restroom, there's a look on Julie Cooper's face that said it's so more isn't even focused on Jimmy's what he's going through, that she actually goes, she's more focused on how much the dress that Marissa is wearing is more important. And they talk about how much the dress cost, and he says, spin on Marissa's dress. The other couple at the table say that, and how much, and he's like, I bet it cost you a fortune. He's like, it should, because we give Jimmy our money and we trust him that he'll make good investments with it. And one of the guys says, I hope to die a rich man one day. This makes, and you can look at Jimmy's face, and he said Jimmy looks uncomfortable, and he starts looking at his glass, and he ends up saying, well, I gotta go, I need to run to the restroom. So Jimmy runs to the restroom, and we see in the restroom Ryan kind of drying his hands, and Jimmy kind of walks in and sees Ryan, and then kind of walks straight into one of the stalls, and he shuts the door and starts kind of having a breakdown and starts crying. And Ryan kind of hears him crying, and he starts to cry. Ryan is standing outside of the restroom, kind of seeing him. He sees him, crying, and we kind of can see, okay, there's something going on with Jimmy. Then we kind of see the aftermath of the fashion show, and they're standing outside waiting for their cars to pick up. And Ryan is standing outside of the restaurant while the fashion show is happening, and Summer sees him, and so they're waiting for their cars to show up. Summer sees him and says, we're all having people over at my friend's Holly's beach house because of charity, where she kind of decided to do a what am I trying to say? she's trying to do a say. She invites Ryan to the party, and what I like, and she's like, "I'm Summer, by the way," and then Ryan goes and sees Seth as he's leaving the party, and says, "Hey, I'm think I'm gonna go to that party that that Marissa's throwing," and then she says that Summer invited us. So Ryan keeps the bro code and lets Seth thinks that Summer invited him as well. Then we see Summer and a bunch of other girls in the back of a Jeep, beckoning them to come and ride with them. And Seth and Ryan both get in the back of the Jeep, and Seth says, "If it's lame, we could always just bail," and they drive off to the party. Then it's the commercial break, saying, "Come on, let's go." And so they get in the back of the truck, or back of the Jeep, and they head out to the party. Commercial break. Then they arrive. Then Seth, Summer, and her groups of friends arrive at the party, and they walk in and see pretty much, women in sky bikinis, dancing, music, and Ryan says, "Welcome to the dark side," and they start walking around the party, and it's kind of like a big house party. And this is one thing I've noticed in most teen shows and teen movies, is there's always a party that's going on. In the 80s, like I said, when I did 10 Things I Hate About, I said 10 Things I Hate About You review. In the 80s, it was always about going to the party. In the 90s, it was always at the party. And in the 2000s, there's always just a party scene. So this is the party scene for them. And Ryan says, "Welcome to the dark side." Then they're walking around, and you see people are snorting up cocaine, and it's kind of a nice drug PSA where Seth says, "Oh, cocaine, awesome, that's cool," sarcastically, and walks off. Let's see. And as Ryan, there's people smoking bongs, and then Ryan and Seth are making their way around the party. Marissa and Summer are there, and their friend Holly, played by Ashley Hartman, who was in the Cancel Too Soon television series Quintuplets. They are looking around, and they see Ryan and Seth, and comment on how Ryan is attractive and Ryan is cute. And Summer really looks at Ryan and starts to, have in the words of Back to the Future, have the hots for her, or for him. And as they're talking, we see Luke is out, is talking to a girl on the porch, or on the deck, and or kind of on the deck, and she says, "Isn't the water so beautiful?" And he says, "Yeah, it is. Why don't we take a walk?" And the girl says, "What about Marissa?" And Luke is like, "What about Marissa? Don't worry about Marissa." and uh, and they end up walking onto the beach. Ryan sees this and decides to talk to Marissa back at the house. So he kind of sees, her boyfriend going off with another girl. So he thinks that this is his time to kind of give time to talk to Marissa. So he goes up to the in the kitchen next to where there's a keg, and Marissa is making a drink and is pouring her a drink, making a drink, and she talks to one of her friends about the bag that she just got, and one of her friends said, I think it was Holly, says, "Does your dad ever say no?" And she says, "No." And then that's right. And then Ryan shows up and is is looking around the the kind of the bar area, and she says, how do you like it in Newport? And Ryan says, "I bet you I can get more in trouble where the place where I'm from." And she says, "You have no idea." Meanwhile, we see Jimmy is outside, or Kirsten is taking the garbage out, where we see Jimmy coming back from from walking his dog, and they talk to Kristen, and Kristen asks Jimmy if he's okay, and Jimmy's like, "Yeah, I'm doing Jimmy," and he says he's been working a lot, and he kind of said, I'm doing okay. I've just been working a lot, and he kind of changes the subject with that looks at kind of and asks, "Who is Ryan?" From what I heard, he was the cousin from Boston, and she feels that it's one of Sandy's clients that he brought home for the weekend. And they start talking about how they have this friendship and how they're living together and living next door to each other, and kind of how they marry total opposites, because Julie Cooper comes out to the door and says, "Jimmy, can you go and get my froyo?" And go to the store and run and get my froyo. And he says, and he's like, "What flavor?" And she says, "Pistachio." "Thanks, honey." And then she waves at Kirsten, and we kind of can tell how they're in that scene, that we find out that they've been friends for a long time, that they live next door to each other, that Jimmy and Kirsten kind of known each other for that they've been kind of family friends for a while. And Jimmy says, "Is this what you kind of thought your life was going to be like?" And then they talk about their kids, and how Marissa, she's probably out and about and does her thing, and how Seth, and then how Kirsten says basically how Seth never goes out, and he never goes out, and Jimmy's pretty much saying, "Oh, don't worry, they're probably not doing anything we wouldn't do at their age." And then we go back to the party. So Marissa and Ryan are pouring drinks, as I said before, and that's the moment where he says, "What do you she says, "What do you think of Newport?" And he says, "I think I could probably get more in trouble more from where I'm from." And she says, "You have no idea." And then she goes, and there's a group of people at a table, and one of the girls asks Marissa if she's in on playing strip poker, and and she walks around the party. Summer spots. So then we see Summer spotting Ryan, and she starts to flirt with Summer starts to flirt with Ryan, and Summer's intoxicated, and Ryan and Summer's intoxicated, and Seth kind of comes in at the wrong time, and he's like, Ryan, what are you doing? You're breaking the bro. And and Ryan and Seth kind of pissed because he's breaking the bro code because Summer starts flirting with Ryan, and Ryan's trying to not make it awkward by saying she's she's drunk. Uh, um, um, Rachel Bilson's character, Summer, is drunk, and Summer starts to get, and we kind of see that Summer starts to get handsy with Ryan, and Seth sees that and starts to walk off. Ryan says, "It's not what you think. It's not what you think," and Seth doesn't kind of breaks the lie and says, "Why don't?" And he says, "Why don't you go back to Cheno? There's probably a really good car you could probably steal in the parking lot." And Summer and everybody kind of stops, and kind of the music slows down, and Summer hears that, and she says, "Cheno, you." And then Seth makes his way out to the beach. When he's at the beach, he starts throwing. He starts hanging out by the fire and just throwing kind of twigs into the fire. And why he's throwing twigs at the fire and kind of sitting there or standing there, kind of at the fire. And there's these two kind of valley kids show up and start pushing around Seth and saying, "Go home, geek. Yeah, we don't need you anymore. Don't need you in here." And they start kind of tossing Seth around, and they grab Seth and try to kind of yank him by his yank him by his ankles. And while he's doing that, Ryan overhears that and runs down to the beach and tells him to let him go. He kind of stands up. Ryan starts to stand up for Seth, and then Luke sees Ryan and goes to the defense of the bullies and says, "Hey, what's your problem?" And Ryan is like, "Why don't you just put him down and let him go, and we can just," he does it pretty calmly. And he says, "You tell me." Then Luke and Ryan get into a fist fight on the beach, and Luke's cronies help beat up Ryan. Luke kicks Ryan in the stomach, and he says the most famous lines of the OC television series, where he says, "Welcome to the OC, biatch." And this is how it's done in Orange County. And Seth and Ryan, beaten and bruised, and a little tipsy, head back to the house. And so we see them coming out of getting to the house and sitting in the pool house on the couch, and Seth is very impressed, is amazed on how well Ryan handled himself in the fight and had Seth's back, and how it was not exactly how he wanted to make his first impression with Summer. Ryan leaves Seth to take a smoke break on the balcony, and Seth is like completely, wasted, and he needs to sleep it off. And so Ryan kind of goes to the balcony, and he takes a smoke break on the balcony and sees a car pull up over at the Cooper's residence. And Summer and Holly, drunk, carry an unconscious Marissa to the doorstep. Ryan sees this and goes to check on Marissa. And he gets over there and looks through her purse and carries her like a knight in shining armor to the pool house and lets her sleep in the bed. And there's this nice little song that's going through the thing. And the way I like it, the way it's shot, and when the directors did the commentary, said we didn't want him, to look kind of creepy, but more genuine and kind of helping her. Or he kind of carries her like a knight in shining armor to the pool house and lets her sleep in the bed. And then the next morning, Marissa is nowhere to be found. And we see, and an angry Christian comes in and says, "Thank God you are," storms into the pool house, takes one look at Seth, and, says, "Thank God you're all right." Takes one look at Seth, who has a bruised face, and she asks him where she had gotten his face bruise. He said kind of, like, "I got into a fight last night." And she's like, "With who?" And he's like, fight. And then she then says, "Okay, let's go into the house now," and slams the door. Meanwhile, Sandy shows up after he's coming back from the house after a early morning of surfing. He says, "Man, you should have." Shows up after surfing the beach that morning, and he talks about how he got, man, there were 6-footers out there, and how the water was great, and Kristen is like, Seth just got into a fight, kind of that motherly term that, Seth, that, she got into a fight, or he got into a fight, and that she kind of starts to blame Ryan as a bad influence on Seth. And she's like, "You see, when you let criminals into our household, this is what happened." And Sandy sort of says, kind of comes to Ryan's defense and says, "I'd rather have him hang out with Ryan than hang out with some trust funder." And she says, and how there is a whole new world, different world out there than, this bubble that he lives in Orange County. And I like how Sandy is kind of impressed that Seth got into a fight, but I also kind of like how he also stands up that he thinks Ryan is still a good influence on Seth. And Sandy kind of talks about, remember when you were, 22, and how fun you were? And he kind of reminisces about how they were in love, and how, how they were, what they were like when they were young. And then young, and how she never thought that she was going to be like her parents, and you never have their lives. And she basically tells him about where they were in their 20s. She said, where they were, she was cool, that she would live in the back of a mail truck. And she said, oh yes, that stinks of peyote. And Sandy starts commenting on the fact that she was fun and rebellious. And you said you'd marry me. You said you'd marry me, and that they'd have this really nice, cute relationship together. And she can't have. And then, but she says, you know what? I can't have Ryan living in my house, and she wants him out anymore. And how Ryan is still, and she wants him out, but she also says, Ryan still has family. He still has a mom. And she also says to Sandy that just because you don't think he's good enough for him, doesn't make that she basically she still has he still has a mother to that she loves. And so so Kristen comes into the kitchen to tell Ryan that it's been great having you, but you need to leave. Basically to let him off easy that he needs to leave. And Ryan is in the midst of cooking them breakfast, and he says um, that he usually cooked breakfast at home. Um, breakfast at home, and you can see that he set the table for breakfast, and it was a really nice small gesture. And Ryan says, you do have a really. He walks in and says, you do have a really nice family. Uh, Ryan goes to Seth's room um, to let has room to him know that let Seth know that he's leaving, and that uh, that he has to go back to Cheno to figure some stuff out. And we kind of tell that there's been a brotherhood bond there. So Seth takes it a little hard, and Ryan gives out his hand, and Seth and Ryan hug it out, and says that he'll come down to Cheno. If he can show Seth, he can show Seth Cheno or Cheno's world. But before Ryan leaves, Seth gives him a map on where he would love to go sailing, and Ryan finally slaps him with the map, and then he gets in the car with Sandy. They drive off. They head back to Cheno, and as he's in the car with Sandy to go back to Cheno, which is kind of he sees Marissa waiting outside for her car ride, and there's this kind of moment where Ryan sees the life he's leaving behind, because he sees Luke's car pull up to pick up Marissa. Ryan and Sandy drive back to Cheno, which is kind of interesting because at the beginning of the episode, they travel from Cheno to the OC, and at the end of this episode, they travel from the OC to Cheno. Ryan and Sandy pull out of the driveway with Ryan's bike in Sandy's car, and as they're pulling away, he sees Marissa waiting outside for Luke in her car, for his car, and she sort of sees, he kind of turns around and sees the life he's kind of about to leave behind. And then so they drive off to Cheno. They get to they stop at Ryan's house, or they get to Ryan's house, and Ryan and Sandy, Ryan's house, and Ryan says he can take it from here, but he goes into the house and finds out that nobody is there. The whole house has no furniture. There's no windows. There's no remains of his mom's stuff, with no note, nothing. And Ryan looks sadly at his birth mother's place, and Sandy looks sadly at Sandy as well. And Sandy says, "Come on, let's go." And Ryan's a little bit like shooken up that he has been abandoned, but maybe he has found has another parental figure in Sandy and the Coens. End episode. So that was the episode, the first episode. It really kind of sets up everything, and it's one of those, there's a lot to cover. But I did like this episode. I did like the relationship between Seth and Ryan, and Sandy and Ryan. And I liked, Sandy's relationship with Kirsten, and and sort of we're kind of understanding the world first. And this is a pretty good episode for a pilot. And I thought it did bring a lot. Watching it now, I thought it had a lot more stuff in it than the pilot, than what I originally thought. But it's a pretty good episode. I give it an 8.6 out of 10. IMDb gives it a 8.9. So it's a really solid pilot. That was the OC. And that was my thoughts on it. I thought it was a pretty good pilot. I liked the other stuff too. Is I think finding out that Jimmy is the nice guy that kind of becomes the he's a nice guy that could be a villain, and and I thought that we kind of get the really start out with the relationship. So for the pilot episode, I give it an 8.9 out of 10. Hope you guys enjoyed this episode. I'll be back for more episodes of the OC and One Tree Hill. Thanks, peace, bye, and like and subscribe.